RealTuners Radio.
So, do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. Register for these at RealTuners.com. Click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more info or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us at RealTuners LLC on Facebook. Learn how to tune your own standalone EFI systems like Holley, FuelTech, Fast, and others on the chassis dyno. And now we've announced new GM, Gen 3, and Gen 4 2-day classes taught by James Short of Shore Tuning. Our classes cover such topics as traction control, individual cylinder tuning on a budget, safe tuning for maximum power, and power adder tuning. Upcoming classes with available seats are as follows. General Motors Gen 3 and Gen 4 factory ECU tuning with HP tuners at Trick Pro Motorsports in Palm Bay, Florida on December 1st and 2nd. And our new advanced standalone tuning for drag racers will debut at Kevin Smith's shop, KSR Performance in Gainesville, Florida on November 17th and 18th. This is a brand new class and Kevin's shop is the place to catch it first. Stay tuned for more fall and winter dates. Sign up for updates at RealTuners.com. These classes are designed to help you get your project running successfully in a course taught by people who actually do this stuff for a living. Good evening and welcome to episode 60 of RealTuners Radio. Tonight, if you're interested in the world's quickest drag racing door slammers, we're talking about cars like Radial Racer Dwayne Mills' Golden Gorilla, Ryan Martin's Fireball Camaro, Michael Belia's championship-winning Pro Mod, and the E-Canoe crew halfway around the world. Then you want to hang out for our guest, Jamie Miller, one of the most sought-after tuners in modern drag racing. Adding to the festivities are his friend and customer, Scott MacDonald, whose X275 car is taking shape with the help of guys like Jamie. We'll also hopefully have time to chat with Justin Keith as he prepares for Tulsa Street Car Takeover. And as always, we have our usual panel of hosts. John Bewley from Little John's Motorsport Solutions, Tom Sewell from Fuel Injector Development, Bill Fowler from Bayer Brakes, Mo Lonis from Nano Nitrous, Ry Klemp from Bowl City Speed, Mark Dahlquist from Throttles Performance, James Short with Shore Tuning, our engineer Scott Evans from Helix Tuning, and finally me, Scott Clark with RealTuners. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's start the show. And what's shaking, everybody? Woohoo! Wednesday night, the usual thing. Should be a pretty cool show tonight. Does everybody hear us okay? Scott's bitching at me. Nope, live feed is fine. Yeah, sorry, I screwed the volume level. Hang on a second. I'm messing with, I'm having technical difficulties on the back side, not the front side. Hang on, guys. I mistakenly turned down the volume. The guys can't hear us very well. Let's see. Mixer to PC.
No, the feed that was coming to us in the background was way screaming loud. It sounds fine on the main feed.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we can hear you a lot.
Gotcha. Okay. Just making sure. Sorry. Everybody take a drink. That's how we do it.
Started the right way.
When the audio fucks up. Sorry. Oh, and I said the first cuss word too. Now, anyway, well, so this tonight should be really cool. I don't know how many of you guys, so this is funny that our main guest tonight doesn't have Facebook, doesn't make humble brag posts on social media all the time, so a lot of people don't know the guy. But if you watch all these videos that are out there of all these kick-ass cars making passes, you know, I listed some of them in the intro there. You'll see this guy in the background, and to me, he's kind of the founder of the Red Hat Mafia, if you will. You may have heard of that group of folks, and you've seen him on the cover of magazines and stuff like that. But anyway, so, I mean, I'll just kick it off with a huge welcome from Mr. Jamie Miller. Thanks for joining us, bud.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. And where are you at right now? Are you somewhere up in like Nova Scotia or something?
No, actually, believe it or not, I'm home. It's a rare occasion. I'm actually home for a few days. I got off tour, we'll say on Monday, and enjoying a few days off right now. Getting ready to go back at it next week.
Who are you traveling with these days, or like what's your schedule look like in the next month? What all you got going on?
So let's see. If we start off next week, I'll be testing at MIR. There's a gentleman that bought Josh Kluger's, which was it was actually started off as a 315 car, his blue Fox body Mustang.
Right.
And then we ran it on 275s. Well, anyway, there's a guy out, I believe he's in New Hampshire area, but he's bought his car and he's looking to go and make some passes and get ready for Donald's race. So we're looking to go testing, and I guess we're going to do some testing at MIR.
Okay. Yep. Maryland. Yep.
Tuesday and Wednesday. And then I will head over to Norwalk, Ohio for the shakedown. And so I'll be doing Ken Cartuccio's Outlaw 10.5 / radial car. And I actually think I'm just working on his this weekend. It's going to be
that'll be nice.
It's going to be it'll be a little bit of a lighter weekend. So
not juggling 6 cars at once, which I've seen you do.
yeah, which I've had to do at times. Right.
Yeah, outstanding. Oh, that's pretty cool. We got your buddy Scott MacDonald on here too. Scotty Wheels Racing. You on with us, Scott? You can hear us, okay?
Yes, sir. Here you loud and clear. Thanks,
outstanding. Buddy. Okay, cool. So we are live. No, that's cool, man. So I talked to Scotty. I was like, man, you think we should get Jamie on here? Because if we think we can, I didn't know if it would be your thing or not. And I'm glad that we talked him into it. And I used to bet with Brad Nagel whether I could get Jamie on here. And he's like, that's the guy you need to get on there. I'm like, I know, but I don't know if he'll want to do this or not. But it's pretty chilled out and laid back. You guys will have a good time. So Scotty, you are in the middle of rolling out this year's version of your X275 class car. Can you give a little bit of background on that project?
So I bought the car, really like 3 years ago. I bought it. Kurt Urban had originally built the car at Wheel to Wheel when he was there.
Right.
And bought the car. It was a 10-point with swing outs and had a Pro Charger on it. I drove it. I bought it. I drove it. And then we broke a couple blowers, decided to go turbo. And I said, we have a local like in New England, X275, little class up here in New Hampshire, but, I'm in Connecticut. And went to my engine builder and said, can we rebuild my motor? I'd like to go, 5.0s. We ended up going 470s. Then last year I said, let's go a little bit faster. So Gary, who actually is like the crew chief for Kenny Cartuccio, who
right.
Jamie tunes for, we all live in like the same area here in Connecticut. And I asked him to drive the car because Jamie thought the car was getting pretty fast. And like Jamie said, being a friend of 20 years, God forbid you ever get in an accident, you're never going to get out of that car to catch his fire.
Right.
So
yeah,
I agreed. Put Gary in the car, and last year we ended up going like a 461, and then we made some major changes this year. We went 440s first time out, and then Jamie decided we really needed more power management because the big stuff didn't really, as you know, work a lot with Holly and stuff. The big stuff is kind of, Jamie, what do you call it? It's just older.
Yeah. Man, it's gone through its life cycle. It's kicked ass for 20 years,
It has.
Yeah.
It has. And we ended up 3 weeks ago, we put FuelTech 600 in the car. And, we'd gone to the finals against Rhodes at Cecil. We lost to Rhodes in the final
which was awesome, by the way. And if you're going to go out, that's the guy that's going to do it. What I mean?
Yeah,
Ron and
exactly.
those guys. Shit. Yeah.
And then we ended up putting FuelTech in the car. And really, this was like our Yellow Bullet was our first time out. We could, Jamie could really concentrate on getting we basically had to start over.
It's a brain transplant, man. It's the equivalent of a human brain transplant. It's a big deal. Yeah, you don't just it's not like you don't just swap one piece and go.
Right, exactly. And then on Thursday it was like the second hottest day at the track. It was the DA was like 2,800. The water grains were like 127. Like it just wasn't nice out. And we went at 59, which nobody else could barely get down the track. So it made me a believer of the changes that we're making are all positive as far as the car goes. And I know now, and a couple more times out, we'll be. It's a front running car now, but I think it's go to the next level. the more Jamie gets to play with the keys.
Outstanding. It's funny you brought up FuelTech. That's really how I know Jamie.
That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, it was funny because I what were we doing? We were helping those guys with a boat engine or something at Proline, and they were like, "Hey man, check out this. These Brazilian guys are bugging us to try this different system out or whatever, and we're kind of interested to look at different stuff." And Holly hadn't really established much of a foothold at the time yet. So they're like, "Hey man, stick around for a day and see if you can make this thing run an engine." And they had a 41X sitting back on the dyno, and we got it fired up. And no, it wasn't a 41X. It was their beater 670. It was one of their
670. That's right.
Yeah, it was one of their beater 670s. That's right. We didn't get a 41X till later. That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they're like, "Here, you can fuck around on this thing for however long." I got it running, pulled it right out of the box, man. It was easy to get running. And it was funny. So then Dillard was like, "All right, well, you're the next step. Why don't you stick around for a couple months and we'll get it to where you're satisfied." And then so we did that for a couple months. And then next step was, now you got to make this guy happy. Let me introduce you to Jamie Miller. I'm like, all right, I didn't know any shit from Shinola back then about anything in drag racing. I'm just an electronics guy. And it was kind of cool. I mean, so a lot of Jamie's feedback went right back up the chain. My job was, all right, this guy didn't like this. He would like to see that. Send it back up the chain. Somebody convert it to Portuguese. And 2 days later, it spits out a new firmware and software. And we try it. We did that for like 6 or 8 months. It was very cool, and that's how I got to know Jamie. And I mean, yeah. So I don't know. You know FuelTech just about better than anybody. I mean, are you guys running? You pretty much graduated all to coil packs, FT Spark, everything internal. Are you not running like grid and mags anymore, or what's going on there? That was a Jamie question, by the way. Did we lose Jamie? He's probably talking and got the thing muted. No, he's still logged in. It shows him logged in. He's just not speaking. So anyway, well, yeah, I was gonna have all kinds of questions.
I imagine he's finding his way back to the unmute switch.
There he is.
Now?
Well, I got
Sorry
you now.
about that.
All right.
Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. So
Gotcha.
anyways.
Take a drink. So, I guess my question was, do we have? I mean, it's funny. Back then, we started off FuelTech. We were doing fuel only. Then we'd spark control. We would get it working with a points box. Then we'd, get it working with MSD boxes. Then we'd, distributors. Then I know we played with coil packs for a couple years before these guys were happy with it. And I mean, now where are you at on that config? Are you? I
mean, basically any new setup is sold with the FT Spark. It has all the internal time-based compensation stuff, which will relate to like an arc module, which we have traction control based off a drive shaft. We have engine curves, and basically it's become all internal in it, which for us, it's a lot easier. There's a lot less components. It's basically comes down to, like, Scott, when you're trying to diagnose and troubleshoot, having one box to have to troubleshoot if there is an issue is much easier than have multiple systems in it.
No, that's
it basically it just become redundancy, when you had everything. Not that this stuff doesn't work well, the other components out there. It's just that we started refining. And like you said, it was, okay, let's get comfortable with the fuel side of it. Okay, that works really well now. Let's take, timing control. All right, now let's start doing some other functions. And, the last thing to really come into play was the coil on plug, and to refine it to where we were happy with what we saw when we could go back and forth, especially like on our alcohol engine stuff, like our Pro Mods and most of the radial stuff, where we could transition from a mag over to the coil on plug and not have any issues.
Well, and you can like do big timing retard and all kinds of torque reduction that way without having to worry about mag being out of phase or distributor. Yeah.
Correct.
Badass. Correct. I knew that was coming eventually. We had done that 2014 on Brad Nagel's Engine Masters motor, and they're like, nah, not quite ready for prime time yet, but 2 years later and bam, it's out there. So that's good shit to see. I'm a big fan of coil on plug anyway. So
I am now. I have to tell you, I definitely am now. It took a little while. You just get used to, creature habit. You just keep doing the same thing.
There's more you have to get right. It's a little bit trickier to make sure everything is sorted out, but once it is sorted out, it's badass.
That is correct.
Yeah,
yep.
That's good. And the cars are going fast too. So you guys are you're going to throw it out if it slows the car down. So that's a good sign.
Well, yeah, we're not going to use it. If it's not going to give us power gains and be more control, we're definitely not going to use it,
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody got questions for these guys? Fire away in the chat windows. We got all the chat windows open. But
In the meantime, I have a question.
Go ahead, Bill.
Go ahead,
And
Scott.
that's Bill. No, Bill is our Bear Brakes guy, and he's also our show attorney. He handles all the legal crap. We get ourselves into trouble every time we start sharing an opinion that somebody doesn't like. Incoming. So, but anyway, so go ahead.
RealTuners does not endorse teenage drinking.
Right.
So let's get that out of the way. All right.
Go ahead, Fowler.
So, So earlier we talked a little bit about this idea of brain transplant, and let's face it, there's a lot of stuff happening out there these days. The market is evolving very rapidly. Not everybody made the good choice back when they bought something, or maybe they want to change, or maybe something's kind of a dinosaur, whatever. When you're kind of looking at this brain transplant situation, and this is either of you guys, but how do you walk through the steps to do something like that? So for the people that are listening who have got, their Commander 950, or they've got, Lord knows what, and they want to go to Holly, they want to go to FuelTech, or they want to go to wherever. What do you say to them in terms of how do you make a good, clean transition to go from one brain to the other?
I can speak a little bit to that just for a second. Were you guys talking about that when I wasn't around or something? That's an interesting story because I mean, I don't know. Jamie may not remember this. He's got all these other adventures that are way cooler, but Keith Berry's car was the first actual moving car to get the FuelTech, the 500. And I remember him saying, well, here's a bunch of data logs from the big stuff. Figure me out a tune and send this car down to Alabama or wherever you guys were going. I don't know, you were racing or you were testing somewhere. And he's like, better, we're going to straight make passes, no engine dyno time or nothing. And I mean, the first thing he kind of helped me figure out was like injector pulse with fuel delivery. Car had the same injectors. So look at the big stuff 3 and look at what your injector pulse is during a pass at a given boost. I had a simulator. I was using an engine simulator, so I could run the FuelTech and say 6,000 RPMs and simulate 50 pounds of boost, and I could make the injectors open for the same amount of time. So that was just the one trick we learned for transferring tunes over was, if that makes sense, if it doesn't, go back and rewind it and listen to it slowly. But anyway, that's my thoughts on brain transplants. I don't know, Jamie, you're moving a lot of cars from one older system to a newer one. Is there any standard procedure for that? Or, I mean, any big mistakes you've learned not to make anymore, or what's the deal there?
Where do you go again?
I don't know.
While we're waiting on him, I got something to add to that. I found through many, many conversions, you get some guy who's got big stuff 3, he wants to move over to a fast, he wants to move over to a Holly, he wants to move over to a FuelTech for whatever he wants to go to. He's got something, he's got a Commander 950, whatever, he's got an old Excel DFI. One of the things I've done that's because I don't have an engine simulator, I've never had one. I've just had to go in and do it, is I do the same kind of thing. I look at what the fuel is with the old ECU, and I look at logs and see what it's doing, and I pick an RPM like 2,500 where I know I can hold it reasonably easy and nothing too crazy. And I start with a good guess at the VE table because everybody's fuel model is slightly different. And some 50 is a VE of 60 on another car, or it's 43 on a different ECU. And so I start with trying to copy the numbers over as close as I can get to start with. And then I just push them by percentages. Hey, increase them all by 5%, increase them all by another 5%, decrease them by whatever until I can get the same, like you're talking, get the fuel in the ballpark. I can find an RPM that I can hold it at relatively easy and get a good starting point. And then you just got to make a pass and double check it, obviously, make sure it translates to the upper end of the scale as well. But you can kind of get the middle range and idle stuff just by sitting there without much effort, just by pushing the numbers around globally.
Jamie, did you ever recover?
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Like, the one nice thing, that comes into play with FuelTech, and obviously this is from a standpoint now that we've accumulated so much data that basically, like you're saying, we certainly would look at logs and things like that and fuel pressure, but try to base it off of other I guess engines that we've tuned and that's very close. And a lot of times what we find is we'll have stuff that maybe refined even more so than what was with their old system, so that makes the transition a little bit easier. And I have seen, like you guys are talking, like Scott said, with the simulator and stuff, I've done this with, I've had some time to work with Shane Tecklenburg from Motec and I'm
sorry.
that, like,
He's a dick. No.
And so like we've tried to take, like, let's just say pulse width and things like that, necessarily going the other way from FuelTech to Motec when we were doing some of the stuff with Econo. And each system, I think there's different controls on injectors, so that doesn't always necessarily work exactly the same. Yes, you'll get yourself close.
I always added like 5 or 7%.
Right. Yeah. Right. So
Jamie's gonna be mad if I was
follow.
Yeah, if I was 5% short, Jamie's gonna kick my ass. I'm scared.
Right. And typically, like, that's what I'm saying, that the nice thing is we've got such a good database now, and that from a support standpoint, that I can call FuelTech, I can call Luis, I can call Anderson and say, look, I got this oddball deal that I don't have any necessary data on. Can you help me with and share some stuff? And that makes it really nice and easy. And especially like from a standpoint of the customer being able to call up FuelTech, order the parts, and be able to fire it up. And it, like you said, it runs. It might not be ideal, but then like what you guys brought in, okay, well, you play with it at idle, you get some, moderate throttle, and then you just start power tuning it, whether it be the track, dyno, whatnot. So I think it's become an easier transition when you're making the changes on these.
Let me back up and reiterate something that Jamie said, and this was cool because it was one of my first couple of experiences working with him as a tuner. They sent me out to help with the Larry Larson deal in 2014, the fall drag week, which was that's 4 years ago now, like this next week. And it was so cool. It was sort of cool because I have told that story before, but we were supposed to get time on the engine dyno because that was not their typical catalog engine at Proline. Well, that fell through because valve train parts were late showing up. So I'm like, maybe we can roll it around on a chassis dyno or something. No, that fell through because the car didn't start until 20 minutes before it had to like leave for the event. And so I remember we were getting ready to make that first pass, and I'm like, holy shit, we don't have any data, or I don't know what to plug in here for injectors or fuels on methanol. It's kind of out of my realm of experience. And Dillard's like, call Jamie, man. He keeps a database of all this stuff. Sure enough, Jamie's like, all right, what size tire? What gear? What's it weigh? What injectors does it have? And you found me a car very similar that had, and some passes. And you sent the data from those passes. We plugged that in, added our magic 5%. Shit was right on the money. So it's the data that these guys carry around. Jamie also taught me how to catalog data logs for the passes. And put the incremental data, the important incremental data, in the name of the file. Store them in folders by event, and Q1, E1 for qualifications or eliminations, all that shit. Totally learned how to get organized from this guy. So very important shit, man.
As a customer, and him tuning my car, that's like vital. So when I send him a log, it's got even track temp, it's got DA, atmosphere, it's got everything. Not to mention, on the FuelTech, I don't know about on the Holly, but on the right-hand side, you can actually slide over with not only incrementals, but like your shock settings, your weight package, and everything, to be able to send that, especially when Jamie travels so much, so he can actually just open it and see everything that went down on that pass before suggesting adjustments or anything like that.
Yeah, that whole system is built for successful class racing at all levels. That's just good stuff to think about. So all your logs you can have tied in, okay, for this pass, here was my DA, here was my whatever data I want to capture, which that's awesome.
So is this a basic spreadsheet in Excel, or is there some kind of relational database tool, or how are you guys?
Are they attaching that data to the data logs, Jamie? Now, how are they doing that? Where do you save this stuff at? Do you keep a spreadsheet of this, or do you keep it in the software, the FuelTech software?
No, it's actually all the stuff is actually right in the data log. So what's nice, like what Scotty was saying, is he can send me a data log, and that thing will have all the incrementals. It will have any of the weight package and stuff, and it's all to the right side. Basically, there's tabs on the data log now that you can open up, and it can have any type of notes that he made. Now, obviously, the notes have to be inputted for every pass, but if they do that, it makes it much easier when you're trying to do online tuning and you don't necessarily know all the variables, as far as what things they've changed. So it really comes in. It's basically become essential to be able to do a good job when you're not necessarily there with the customer, and looking at just surely looking at data,
Yeah. Man, that's outstanding. That's a good idea. That's kind of like how RacePack has done it for a while too, but you got to just make sure someone's disciplined to do it. But that's nice to have it planted there, right there with all your data. So, and now you got enough IO and the 600 where you can capture some stuff too. So I mean, are you feeding the drive shaft speed sensor in there now, and are you using their onboard plots for engine RPM and drive shaft speed?
Absolutely. For everything. I mean, honestly, Scott, we use that for everything that we're allowed to use it. So for NHRA, where you cannot use any kind of traction control or engine control functions, things like that. But any type of the drag radial versus the world, X275, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we use and we use it in conjunction with each component. Like we'll run, as far as the way I approach it is, I run my drive shaft, I run to engine curves. I am just trying to control the rate of acceleration because I feel like it gives me less room for error, and then I can make smaller changes to the car, and I basically know how it's going to accelerate by doing that way.
Gotcha. Makes sense. That's interesting. How do you name your data logs? And you save files for each pass? Do you save like a calibration file for each pass?
I do. And so now, and I don't know if you've looked at the stuff as of recent, but now they've got a deal where the data log, actually the map, there's a way to save the map in the data log. So when you download the data log, it actually saves the map with it.
That is so
which makes it
fucking awesome. Yeah.
Right. So it makes it way easier for a customer to send us just a data log file. We can open up the map.
It's the whole
out
package.
Of that.
Yep. There's one file has got the data log and the calibration that was associated with that log at the time of the pass.
Right.
Which is easy to mess up.
You brought up a point of being able to organize. My biggest pet peeve when I look in somebody's laptop is, you ask them about their best pass and they go back to where I was at St. Louis. It was Q1, maybe it was Q2. So I've gotten in the habit of saving the time slip as the actual file so that I know whatever file I'm looking at, whatever log I'm looking at, this is exactly what this thing ran. It was Q2 in St. Louis. It was, these are the numbers that it ran. It went one flat, 265, went 388 to the eighth, all this stuff. And it just makes it easier when you're going through, and then you can relate. And I do that with all the files. So if it's a car I have race pack in, all these files are named exactly the same. So I can quickly go through and say, I'm not looking for Q1 from 2 years ago on the best pass and things like that.
And you can open up a Windows search and literally search for that time or that string, and it'll pull you all the files up associated with that. Yeah, I've seen them do this. It's good.
Yep. It makes it so much easier to go through, and honestly, any customer that I deal with, that I'm hands-on with and I work with them often, I try to get them to get into that same format. It's tough because like you said, it takes more time, but the information is invaluable when you run into a struggle with the car and trying to get back to where you were when the car ran really fast. The more notes you have, the easier it is to get back that. And we've all been in those scenarios where we're trying to get back to square one when the thing ran awesome. And where did we go wrong? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. How did we get off here? Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
But now, what percentage of the time is it something on the keyboard versus you having to get out and work on the chassis? This is my other observation about Jamie. He's a successful tuner because the guy can build a damn car on top of everything else. He knows where to set the bars. He knows how to pick springs. He knows how to change when the converter needs changed and why. What percentage of the time is actually spent on the keyboard versus doing other things?
I'll be honest with you. For myself, it's 50. I would say it's 50% because I typically don't try to just fix the car with a keyboard. I really don't. If I try to decipher the information and say, okay, is there something that I can go and fix with the car as far as, can I give it more traction? Does it need more travel for this? Does it need a weight package swing? Because ultimately, the way that I see it, the majority of the time, if you're struggling with traction issues and things like that, then the only way you're fixing it with the laptop is slowing the car down. You know what I mean? So there's a point to where you have to say, okay, other guys are running faster, so it's not a fact that the track isn't capable of taking it.
Gotcha.
I've got to figure out how my car to take it, and that's where knowing those things and approaching it a little bit different. I think it helps. It makes you, just like you said, I feel like I'm more well-rounded. I built cars for years. I've worked for guys to actually tune chassis and had nothing to do with keyboards or computer or anything like that. So I've been involved with it all around, which really helps. It does.
Yeah. That's outstanding. So having a broad skill set, once again, is probably better than going deep necessarily with any given one, if this is the kind of stuff you want to do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you do much fabrication work in the off season, or is there an off season for you anymore? Or?
I wish there was an off season. There really isn't. I used to do well. Okay, so I try to do some stuff for Dwayne Mills. He's got a full shop at his house, and all the fabrication equipment. And his guy Tim Davis, that's like his car chief. We work really well together. He's very talented as well. So we try to come up with ideas, and we do some fabrication on that car. But honestly, my time is so limited that I don't get to do it as much as I would like to. I
Sure.
still enjoy doing that. I don't want to do it on a daily basis anymore, but I still do enjoy it. And then I got to do quite a bit out in Bahrain when we were racing with Econo Racing, with both the small tire Lexus and then the Pro Mod Lexus. So we were constantly refining those two cars.
How long were you camped out over there for those projects?
We would start going, typically I would start going in October or November, and I wouldn't get back home until my last trip would be like March there, So we would spend quite a bit of time. And I mean, the amount of data that you collect and the things that you can learn, because track conditions basically stay the same for almost the whole time you're there.
Yeah.
There's just a lot to be learned. There really is, the amount of testing you get to do, and the I'll be honest with you, the budgets that they have
Sure.
is just incredible, so that you're capable, you can come up with these crazy ideas of stuff you want to try that typically guys aren't going to be willing to spend the money on, and they have the budget to allow us to do that. And I mean, that's where I got to work with Shane a bunch. And I mean, you can learn so much stuff and try so many different things. It's a lot. It's actually a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah. No, it's fun when you do have a little bit of budget to learn. I mean, that's like me playing with the combustion pressure testers. It's like, this is cool. We don't get to do this very often, and figure out that you need an 8-degree timing spread across the motor. But yeah, that's my kind of thing. I'm totally down with that. I love it when guys have time to spend the money to do the maximum effort approach,
Right.
or the government level
Right.
stuff. But good shit. Anybody else got any questions for Jamie while we're here? We're halfway there.
I do.
Go ahead, Bill. Fire away.
So this was the subject of a lot of our discussion. We do this kind of offline leading up to the show. But when you get into these first startup situations, especially if you're going to show up somewhere to maybe a new car, new combination, and with Drag Week coming up and some of the other big races coming up, we've seen some pretty high profile cars, get strapped down to the chassis dyno or whatever, and they nuke them almost right out of the gate. Is there another set of things that you would recommend that people do to make sure things are right first?
Yeah, how the heck do you approach a car that you
put
can't put on the dyno, that you have to just make hits with?
Yeah, so I'll give you our rundown. I mean, I know from a customer standpoint, sometimes this gets a little frustrating, but I try to beat this into them that I start off very slow. First of all, new startup, you're going to be going over data. You're going to be going over sensors and verifying that as many things that you have available to you to look and make sure that this engine is happy is obviously working properly to start out with. And then for me, my first thing is obviously getting it to spool, looking at it, but I will also look at my spark plugs right after a spool just to make sure that I don't have a cylinder that's doing something funny, that I see that it's got a bunch of temperature in it or the timing looks off. And then, we just start going very slow from there. It's a 60-foot hit and the plugs come out. It's a 100-foot hit. It's a 150-foot hit, and it usually will take me 6 to 8 runs before I'll go to the finish line with a car on a new build, just to be safe. Because look, your window gets bigger the shorter distance you go, and you can find issues. You can see, does the engine have oil pressure? Is it fluctuating at all? And the one thing that I see, and I know for myself, I was just telling somebody this story, that getting into tuning and wanting to make, your first thing, I know when a guy hires me, I want to make his car faster, but you have to take a step back and you got to say, okay, the first thing I need to do when I pull data, I got to go through engine vitals. I got to make sure that this engine is happy. Before I worry about going any faster, I got to make sure that this thing is going to live, So I've tried to really get myself to focus on, for the first couple minutes of looking at data, does everything in the engine look happy? Do my EGTs look good? First of all, do my spark plugs look good? Was oil pressure good? Fuel pressure? Do I have any issues around a turbo car with back pressure that would say we have necessarily, we could have gates, race gate diaphragms that are torn or things like that. So I like to say that I go through like a scan of all engine vitals and then go from there. So leading back to it, on a new car, that stuff is key to make sure that the engine is happy, and it's a slow process to start, but typically you have much better results than saying, well, I tuned one of these and it was exactly the same. I'm going to run it to the 8th mile, the first hit. You can have anything happen. You have injector clips fall off. You have an injector get stuck with trash in it because all the new hoses on the car, and it had a piece of, of the inside hose get cut and it ended up in an injector. And, I've seen crazy stuff happen. And like I said, your window becomes much bigger if you run it a short distance because you can see things happening before they become catastrophic.
For those of you in the audience, play that last segment back and burn it onto the wall of your shop.
Yeah, and it's for us, for the Pro Line group and all the guys, that it seems to be a fairly successful approach. Like anything, you'll just have things that aren't going to work out at times, I guess you can say, and you have things that are beyond your control. But we try to minimize those.
That was a good question, man. That's a good topic. Take it easy and slow. I like your approach. You guys will make decent hits, but you'll just do them short. It's a lot easier on a car like that. With a Pro Mod, it's hard to just turn the power down to 30%. The thing, sometimes they won't even hit, so you got to hit them with a little bit of something, but just do it for a short period of time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so like a Pro Mod, we don't necessarily go out there and go slow. Like, I mean, if we take a new Pro Mod, you're trying to go, let's call it a slow pass would be 102 to 60 foot. But I mean, you're going to leave it somewhere between, 13 to 15 pounds of boost. And you're going to ramp it up pretty quick. And I mean, even in 1 second, that thing's going to have 20 pounds of boost, 25 pounds of boost. But you're just running it for a short period of time, like I said, so that you can check. And I mean, you have to get some heat in them. You have to make sure it's making some boost because you really don't see the issues until it is, run there. And most of these engines on a billet headed deal, they're pretty durable. They can withstand some little issues, we'll say, and like with a twin alcohol or a twin injector alcohol engine, you've got the injector staggered and staged. So that's why we do the shorter passes, because you want to make sure that both injectors are coming in and the duty cycles look right at that interval of boost and things like that. So that's the short blast with a lot of power seem to give a good insight on how everything's functioning.
Can you talk about the typical power management strategy at the hit? We know you can't just drop 4,500 horsepower right at the hit. What methods do you use? Whatever you're willing to share to kind of get these things out of the hole. That first 100 feet is critical and probably the most difficult part. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and yes, and it's again, it would go back to what kind of car you want to know on. I mean, it's because it's a completely different strategy whether you're on a radial tire or a big tire. Obviously, in a big tire, we're looking for specific wheel speed numbers that to get the car moving and that the tire isn't too slow. Where it's just the opposite in a radial setup, where you're looking to stick that tire instantly off the button and have it just locked down to the track as best as possible. So there's no wheel speed whatsoever, as far as slippage goes.
Are you guys fixed timing retard at the hit, or are you just letting the rate limiters like RPM and wheels and drive shaft speed, or how do you manage that?
So let's talk on a drag radial just to start out with. So on a drag radial, I'll have an engine curve, which I have a plotted curve of basically how I want my engine rate of acceleration based off of, data that we collect again on converter and gear ratio and things like that. And I will also use a drive shaft plot. But in doing that, I will use a plotted out launch retard. So I'm actually using 3 different things. And basically what that is I want it to get up into the curve and maintain timing coming out of it. But I also don't want it to use, let's say, too much of it. So I want to know that I have the engine somewhat in control. So it's amounts of each, working together. And then, the drive shaft that we use is really there for slippage. That's there to catch it if it starts. And then on the radial, it's very difficult because you only have so much room for error there, so I'll typically run my drive shaft plots. Like, let's say if I have a plot, I know a plotted drive shaft data runs, let's say 380 flat. I will run the drive shaft somewhere 50 RPM above that, so that if that thing tries to shake or tries to get out of control at any spot, it's got available timing to get that under control. And that really helps with consistency on those cars.
Is that a case where you'll chop the timing, or you just do an aggressive retard, or?
I do aggressive retard to when basically I have let's say a plotted A line and B line. And so when it touches A line, it just starts to slowly take out some timing. But if it gets over that and it gets halfway to B line, then it starts getting more and more aggressive on the timing that it allows it. And you have a maximum timing that you allow it to take out, Scott.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's badass. Wow, it's kind of funny because that's what we're finding with the no prep guys. I mean, transition a little bit. You take care of the Fireball Camaro, Ryan Martin's car, correct?
Yes, I do.
So what's the story switching over or transitioning to the no prep stuff? I mean, you guys have done super good a no prep king, so obviously got something figured out. What was different there about taking a car like his and making it successful there?
So one thing that I learned real quick on that deal is you don't want to use any type of engine plot on those engines, because the staging routine is never consistent. If you watch them, those guys will be on the chip for an awful long time at points. So if you were to try to run an engine curve, you get the converter so hot that it would run through and you would never get any consistency. So that is something that I've learned, that you have to run a plotted timing curve in to make it consistent. Yes, the engine may flare up some because it's got hotter transmission fluid, but it won't affect the ET. The engine curve or the engine RPM will just be higher, and then I'll run a plotted timing curve, and I will use some drive shaft control. What's crazy about that racing is that you can't get too aggressive with the drive shaft plots, because the tire actually spins the whole way down the track. After they make the gear change, it is just it's an up and down drive shaft signal. And if you try to maintain it, you just slow the car down. It's a crazy way of racing, I will tell you that. When I first saw this, I was like, man, we're never going to be able to go fast with this thing spinning all the way out the back.
Right.
And what you learn quickly is that those tracks are actually really good once they start getting cars to go down them. For 250, 300 feet, the track is really good. Beyond that, you've got to get there as fast as you can and then just maintain from there is really the trick to that no prep racing.
Oh man, that is outstanding.
So for those of us who just watch TV shows and don't know anything about this, can you explain what a scramble button is?
Yeah, so basically in your boost controller, you can override your maximum CO2 plot. So let's just use 50 pounds for an example, that you have 50 pounds of CO2 on top of your wastegate to produce 30 pounds of boost. Well, with a scramble button, you can say, if I hit this button, it will add however much you want in that button. So for example, a lot of guys will do 10 to 15 PSI additional when you hit the scramble button. And you'll see at times some guys will grab it right off the hit. I don't know too many drivers. If you give them a button and it makes the car faster, that they aren't looking to hit it. Yeah, they're looking to hit it as soon as they let go of the trans brake, And to be honest with you, look, there's some guys that use it. Ryan very rarely does. I just feel like if you're getting beat, I certainly don't want people to take this the wrong way, but I feel like we've got a good enough combination that if we're getting outrun that far, we just did a bad job, and that a scramble button is not going to fix where we messed up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I've only seen it a couple times where the track was so good that I come back and say, man, I should have had 15 more pounds of CO2 on that thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Usually it's one of those deals, you're doing it because you're getting beat and you're just doing anything you can. But the reality is, I've yet to win a race with it. I'm not saying other guys don't. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't believe that we've ever hit that thing and it had any benefits of winning a race because of it.
What method do you lean on the most when you're just show up at a track for the first time and you're trying to figure out what tune-up to start off with? Is it watching other cars? Do you go out to the track with some crazy-ass torque measuring tool? Or do you walk on it and twist your feet? Or how do you decide where to start?
I'm kind of that older school style from twist your foot, and track temperature is key to me. Don't get me wrong. I collect data from the meters, but there is, okay, I'll give you an example. I've been at the track and I found out this with the meters that was interesting. A couple years back, Michael and I were testing in Charlotte and went up and ran it was the first time we went fives in our NHRA car, and the meter pulled 320 on the start and it was about 380. And the track temperature was 110 degrees. I went back up there, meter pulled the same identical numbers, but the track temperature was up an additional 15 degrees. So logic tells you if it's got the same grip, it should take the same tune-up. Well, that was not the case. And so I learned real quick on that there's a difference on how the meter, the way it's pulled and the way that it basically snaps off of the track. You can get to the same number, let's say, but it doesn't have the same grip. And I've learned to feel that with my foot. You know what I mean? And I kind of have a feeling of when I know, you can tell when the track is getting hotter, when it's got more movement in the track.
Say that's similar to like somebody using a torque wrench and they kind of snap it to get the torque reading they want.
Correct. That is correct. And that's why you'll see guys that'll have 2 and 3 guys on the starting line pulling, and they've got 60 numbers difference in the way they pull. That and look, it's accurate within itself. It's like anything. That's why I have the same guy for our NHRA team with Michael. I have the guy Chaz that works with us. He goes up there and pulls the track. I have him do it. He does it the same way every time. So I know the data that he's giving me is good. Instead of me doing it one time, him doing another, because we end up yanking on that torque wrench or that torque meter a little bit different, and it will give you a different result.
That track temp difference is also the difference between what you're talking about being rotational torque on the track versus a dragging, pushing, pulling, like straight line drag of the track.
Correct.
Circulation instead. So you're going to get a slightly different reading than what the tire can really do.
What about tire temperatures then?
Are
tire temperatures critical then after through a burnout? I mean, are there thoughts
absolutely.
on that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know for me and in the slick, on the Pro Mod, when you get to a real hot day, you want to minimize your burnout. You don't want to get that tire so hot, track temperature. I mean, ultimately I've always tried to stay around whatever track temp is, to be similar to that in tire temp. But obviously the hotter the track gets, the shorter the burnouts get, and vice versa, really.
So do you shoot for a target temperature if the track's 110? You try to make the tire 110, or
yeah, I usually try to keep the tire 100, 110. That's usually about where it seems to be pretty happy. Look, there's variables that come into all this, obviously, you know what I mean? And like my driver and a lot of the NHRA drivers have just a routine that they do. They do their burnouts a certain distance, and I know unless I specify to Michael, hey, I want you to do a shorter burnout or I want a longer burnout, he's pretty consistent with our tire temp stuff. You know what I mean? So, I will say, like, we put a new set of tires on, it's always a longer burnout. Try to get heat in that for the first heat cycle of that tire, and from there on, we just try to basically keep it so that the tire temps are pretty close past the pass, and that I'm not making a big change there.
In the situations where you've got, more budget, do you do a heat cycle on sets of tires to have those available so that you've got a consistent set to change them out? Or is this, just put them on, do the bigger burnout to kind of get them seasoned, or whatever the phrase would be, and do it that way? I mean, F1, all the tires have been seasoned. Everything has happened. They're in bags before they run the cars out. And, that's almost infinite budget. So I'm just kind of curious where you guys prep falls in that continua.
Yeah, I do not like to go up there in any round of either be qualifying or eliminations to have a brand new set of tires on. We typically look to have 2 to 3 sets of tires scuffed in the trailer at all the time. So when we go testing, that's one of the biggest things that we do when we go testing is we run, usually I like to make 2 to 3 hits on a new set of tires and have them in the trailer ready to go. Certain brands of tires do a better job with a new tire compared to something that has a few hits on it. For example, like a Goodyear tire, we have had very good results with it being a brand new tire, just doing a single burnout and making a hit. The Hoosier tire seems to like about 2 to 3 passes, and they come into their own, and then they're pretty much happy there for about 15 to 18 hits. I do not like to go and make any type of hit in eliminations or qualifying at NHRA with a new set of tires, unless it's just one of those unforeseen situations where either you're at the limit of runs on your tire and you don't have a scuff set, or you had some type of failure in the tire. So no, I typically don't go up there though with a new set for any type of rounds in NHRA.
How does that same thinking apply to radials?
Radials is just, honestly, I've yet to see a radial tire not go down on the first hit. Like that was any cause of the tire itself. Really, the only difference with a radial tire, we'll put those on. I've gone into eliminations with a new set of tires when we had an issue, and it's never been a problem. One good long burnout on it, go to the starting line, and it usually works as well as it does the 25th hit you made on it, So I don't see the difference in that. And I guess that has something to do with this, obviously the sidewall construction and things like that. And I think just the compound differences and how the differences between the compounds of the big tire to obviously the radial tire.
Do you guys balance your radial tire wheel combinations?
Yes, honestly, we balance everything. Yeah, we balance everything. Even our big slick tires, we've got into the habit of spin balancing them now, just because I can see Michael will come back and be like, we just had this happen this weekend. Come back and say, man, I feel a vibration in the car. After the 8th mile, and I can look in the shock velocity and I can see it on one side of the shock that it's got some type of resonation going on, and sure enough, have the tires balanced and it fixes it. So now we've gotten the habit of balancing everything before it goes on the car.
Cool. There's something you've said right along here that I think is implied. I'm guessing everybody who's listening gets this, but I'm going to repeat it because I'm not very smart. I'm hearing that you've got this, you've censored the shit out of these cars.
Oh yeah.
You're measuring just about everything that can move and be measured, because we're talking about a lot of things. Can you kind of walk through a little bit about, for people that are looking to be, get more seriously fast and look at some of these classes, what they need to be looking at and measuring and logging?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can tell you for us, in any turbo application, some of the ones that I see that help out the most. So in a turbo application, having back pressure sensor in the exhaust before the turbo, having wastegate pressure to monitor CO2 so that what you're asking the boost controller to do and what it is actually doing can be two different things. And the only way to really be able to verify that is if you're, monitoring the pressure at the top of the gate. EGTs, exhaust gas temperature. I mean, on an alcohol deal, a max effort alcohol deal, I don't like to run without them. Yes, your plugs tell the tale, but the thing is, like with injectors and anything like that, being able to see an issue before it actually makes a difference on the plug is key. Where you start to see an EGT make a move, and you can, go to that individual cylinder and add fuel, and you might not see the plug really showing it, but if it had gone further into the run, like we were talking earlier about, new builds and things like that. So exhaust gas temperatures, obviously oil pressure. I like to see cylinder head temperature, manifold temperature. That really plays into how much timing you can get away with depending on weather and how hot the basically the intake saturation has gotten. Then it gets into chassis stuff where, again, going back to like a Pro Mod deal, a max effort NHRA car. I mean, we have ride height sensors in the front and the rear on the car. We utilize shock sensors at all 4 corners. We also use laser ride height sensor off the rear end housing. And what that tells me is I collect a lot of data from that. And that tells me how aggressive I have the forelink and how much I'm technically crushing the tire, we'll say. So it tells me how much load I'm putting into the tire. We use track temperature. We use tire temperature. So in a tire temperature sensor, what you can see is you can actually see the temperature raise and make a big move in temperature swing, and it's actually right before the tire spins. So it's very interesting when you start looking at data like that. And then, working off math channels, you can get shock velocity off of your shock sensors, which is key to when we were just talking earlier about having a vibration in the car that you might not necessarily see with the shock sensor. But once you get into the velocity, you can really notice what's going on with that. So
we got converter charge. We got converter charge pressure too, James.
Oh yeah, converter charge pressure, trans pressure. So any car that we run a lockup on, we also monitor lockup pressure. So we seem to keep adding to the transmissions more so than. And every time I talk to Mark from M&M Transmission, I'm asking him to add some other sensor that I can look at what's going on internally. We have so many dump valves that we're controlling and, checking the pressures and all that goes back into how the car stages and being consistent with that. The other is brake pressure, which we not only use in race pack now, but we also use in FuelTech because we have a staging control that we use so that it monitors and maintains the specific brake pressure that we program. So again, going back to it, so that the staging is consistent every time.
Is that something that the driver gets direct feedback on? Is the brake pressure? I remember taking Frank Hawley's class a million years ago, and they had us staging those cars. I frankly thought it was because the brakes were crap, but we had a giant 4-inch gauge on the dash, and we had to make sure that we staged it against a certain amount of brake pressure in order to hold the car. Is this similar to that, so that you can get the bump in done right, or how is that used?
Yeah, so the way that we have it set up in the FuelTech is the driver input has to make over what we're trying to shoot for or maintain for our brake pressure. So let's just use example, 250 pounds of brake pressure, which is typically I start between 150 and 250 PSI is what I like to see. So as long as the driver makes more than 250 PSI, when he grabs the trans brake, it starts pulsing the line lock, and that maintains the 250 or whatever I've programmed in there. So when I start making changes to the creep function, bump button function, at least I know that my brake pressure is consistent. So all the driver has to do is go and make more than what I'm trying to shoot for, and then the system will relieve whatever it needs to keep and maintain at that specified amount.
So almost a brake by wire, but the driver is the one creating the initial applied pressure.
Correct.
So you're pulse width modulating the line lock.
Correct.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah, it works really well. I mean, you'll see the cars go out there, and what's really nice is from my standpoint, and you can get a car that really stages consistently and is very smooth where it's not rocking, because you see those cars that go in and they rock back and forth. Well, the problem with that is
that's this guy.
Yeah, well, if you look at your shock sensors, you're constantly leaving with the suspension loaded completely different every time, and you could be lowering your crankshaft a quarter of an inch, and so when you get it into a very smooth staging, the car becomes more consistent just because everything is leaving at the same heights and points that you've built a database on. You know what I mean?
Right now, my shock sensors kind of consist of zip ties to.
Yeah, I get it. Yep. iPhone works great. Slow motion iPhone. I do quite a bit with that.
So we had a listener asked about, you talked about converters, that kind of led me into this question. When you're talking about setting the launch setup on the two-step or for an automatic car with a converter, do you target how far below the converter's stall or flash point do you target? Do you want to hit the converter hard, or do you already want that thing loaded when you let go of the button? And what's the difference between a radial and a slick?
Okay, so that was what I was going to get with. The approach is completely different from one tire to the next. On a radial tire, I look to what I call get a running start at it. So I'm much lower than actually the stall speed of the converter. So basically, think of it like just slipping the clutch, where you get a running start at it, and it takes some of the drive away from the converter and the tire. It's just the opposite on a big tire car, a Pro Mod. You want to be closer and higher RPM and closer to the stall speed, so that as soon as you let go of the button, it snaps that tire and starts getting it moving, so it doesn't stop the tire. Because, you know, that's what the funny thing about that big tire is. You can go into tire shake from being too slow, and you can go into tire shake from being too fast. And so you're constantly trying to maintain those specific numbers of wheel speed. And so that's the approach, you know, being from one tire to the other, where, you know, my radial stuff will be very flashy and I'll leave lower RPM. I mean, typical, like even a radial versus a world car going, you know, let's say, I don't know, 102 60 foots, we may only be 3,800 to 4,000 RPM leave, where, you know, on a Pro Mod, you'll be somewhere in the range of 5,000 RPM. You know what I mean? So your approach on that initial hit to the tire.
And on that radial car, it's not just that RPM you're looking at. You're looking at the difference in the actual flash of the stall, because if you're leaving at 38, it's going to flash the stall to something higher than that when you leave.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, it's going to be like, usually it's close to 6,500, somewhere in that range. You know what I mean?
Yep. And the radial versus the world car gets to use all of those wonderful traction control, engine management, launch control,
correct,
speed targets, whereas the NHRA car does not. So, you know, that's where we're getting down to sanctioning rules and a lot of other things, which I think may help some people understand why the radial cars and some of the other things are so amazingly fast now compared to, you know, because people say, hey, that 275 tire guy just ran a high 3, and so did the Pro Mod.
Right.
Yeah, well, there's
you can run more than 42
this.
pounds of boost.
Right.
Yeah, there's reasons for
they're
these
not boost
things.
limited.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, for our whole traction control in an NHRA Pro Mod is our boost controller, and obviously, like you brought up, it's only up to 36 pounds, but really, it's just a plotted timing curve that we have to go in there and manually change every time. So there's nothing that can be giving feedback to make changes to that retard curve. It's
In
solely
real
what
time.
we've programmed. Yeah, in real time. So
open loop.
So yeah, that makes it very difficult. So, you know, you'll go up there, and I mean, that's why you see too, you know, on Blaine's car, you know, there's a window of what I can get away with. I know as long as I'm in this range, I can get this car to run. Where the NHRA car, I mean, I've got the laptop on top of it, or I've got 5 maps loaded in this thing, and I'm making changes every time I'm looking at the track and seeing what happens. The track get bald on the starting line, and I've got to make massive moves to the initial hit to that tire, you know? So where Blaine's, like you said, you've got a drive shaft control, you've got an engine control. Okay, you know what? It might get into it, but it's going to pull an additional, let's just call it 8 degrees of timing and get it back under control, where I don't have that availability in the Pro Mod.
Yeah, the funny car guys have 2 guys on the starting line looking at that, so they have enough people to make all the mechanical adjustments. One of those little things. Yeah.
Right.
So I got a question. It's kind of self-serving here about boost control, and what are your guys' strategies that you guys use? We talked a couple of weeks ago to Garrett Mitchell, and he brought up the fact that he pulled the wastegate signal off the bottom of the gates and just basically tried to push the gates closed using the, you know, dome pressure. What are your guys' take? Like, what is it done at the pro level?
I mean, I still reference all my stuff. I still reference off the bot. You know, the bottom side goes to compressor housing, or it'll go to manifold pressure, and then I run CO2 pressure on the top side. I have at times when, let's say, like, you know, obviously something that's not limited to boost and things like that, I have removed the signal, and I've actually removed the signal going down the track, which will just speed up the compressor speed unbelievably. You know, it's a pretty wild deal, and it can get a little hairy going down the racetrack.
Right.
But it makes a lot of power, and you just got to watch back pressure, and that goes back to having the data to support that stuff. But no, typically we run, you know, the bottom and top, and, you know, for our NHRA stuff, we're limited in its specific boost controller that we have to run. When that's not the case, you know, we've got controllers internally in the FuelTech now. We also use a lot of the hyper control units from Joe, which, you know, we've had great results with both, honestly.
That's outstanding. So can you talk a little bit about lockup converters? Are you guys finding success with those? I know in the last few years they've been playing with them.
Yeah, I mean, we have started doing more and more, honestly, this year with Dwayne's car and then now Ken Cartuccio's Outlaw 10.5 car. Yeah, there is a lot to be had with the lockup stuff. It's still in refinement, and you guys got there's guys out there like Mark Mickey that are constantly evolving that with trying new stuff in his own car and pushing the envelope, and I mean, it's really coming to the point where, if it's allowed, you're going to have it to be competitive, because there is a lot of numbers to be had in any car that I've worked on. Ken Cartuccio had an Outlaw 632 car that I've helped with. It's a nitrous car. I don't do a lot of nitrous tuning, but this particular car we've worked together on for couple of years now. And it was a fairly fast, low, let's call it a mid to low 20s car. And I mean, you guys know nitrous stuff at that. Basically, your nitrous is in about 1 second. It's just kind of along for the ride.
Right.
And when we went from locking the car up, let's say at 2.6 into the run, and then we locked it at 0.6 into the run, the thing all of a sudden gained 8 numbers that you're like, wow. Now,
are you doing anything like phasing in the lockup with PWM, or are you just dropping the hammer? How's that work?
Honestly, I have not seen a big. Now, this is I have not seen a big have any success with the PWM. I don't see it work as well, because really what happens is it takes a certain amount of lockup pressure to actually engage the lockup. So really, what it is you start, if your pulse width modulating that, and it's like, okay, you get to a point where there's a slope of how fast the pressure comes
non-linear, yeah.
Yes, and so that's one of the reasons, going back to it, why we monitor the lockup pressure, because you find out that there's a specific amount of pressure that it takes to start engaging the clutches, and once that happens, then the lockup kind of gradually comes in. It's not just like a switch, we'll say.
Yeah.
And on the turbo cars, it seems to like more of a slope how it gets applied. So I haven't seen big gains with the PWM stuff,
But I've seen them upsetting the chassis with a quick lock halfway down the track.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So if it helps that, then that may be worth something.
And that might be, and that is, and then we have things that we do with dump valves once the lockup's on that will blow off dump valves, will help take converter charge pressure away and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of things, if you get creative, that you can start doing and finding out things that help it, hurt it, and obviously the sooner you get that lockup on, the better the back half's going to be. And so that's the strategy as of right now, is just keep turning that thing on sooner and sooner.
Right. Awesome.
You touched on dump valves a couple of times, and Mark Mick and M&M, sort of pioneered that in the first place. I could be wrong. Somebody else might have done it first. But are you allowed to say how many dump valves you now run on some of these cars?
Yeah, typically, like on Dwayne's car, I run 2 dump valves. So there's an internal dump valve and there's a single external. I have them hooked up independently, and I will control basically the internal dump valve. I just solely use for spooling. And then what we use is we have a boost activated output, which basically is just an output that shuts that dump valve off at a specific boost level instead of an RPM level, because you may be making 3 pounds of boost at 4,000 or 10 pounds, you know what I mean? And that way it doesn't roll the motor backwards, and more, again, it goes back into that consistent staging. So to get the converter charge pressure back to its normal state when you start using the staging control helps with the consistent staging. But so basically what it comes down to is I'll use the internal just for spooling, and then the external I will sometimes use to control the converter and the characteristics of it. Let's say right off the trans brake, at the release of the trans brake, I may leave it on for a couple tenths of a second. I may dump it out the back. I've tried a bunch of different things, so I have them tied in independently so that I can control them independently.
So Rye a minute ago touched on this. That was Rye Klemp with the deep AM, FM radio voice guy. Anyway, Rye touched on this a minute ago. Most guys who are sort of starting out in the turbo world end up, either trying to stage with their foot brakes or something else, and you end up with that car that looks like it's about to jump out of the beams just from sheer suspension movement. What's the recommendation for guys that are at that level to how to get that staging process to be smoother?
Really, it comes down. See, that's where it gets. So on a turbo car, if you're doing and manipulating converter charge pressure, it's really important to understand when the charge pressure is coming back in, because that has a huge effect on how much drive behind the converter there is. The other thing is, like we talked about, is brake pressure. That really comes into play, and then spending the time to get your bump box to work as smooth as possible is really key. And one of the things with foot braking that's tough, like honestly, the whole reason the whole bump box came about, a lot of the reason was because the NHRA mandated us to have carbon brakes. You can't hold a Pro Mod at 4,500 with 15 pounds of boost with
carbon brakes. Yeah, they got to be way hot to start working.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when I know going back when we ran 10.5 and when we staged with just the brakes, the key was having a ton of brake pressure available to you. So speccing out the correct size on master cylinder, pedal ratio, all that stuff was key at that time without the bump box, because it was really important to have the 1,100 pounds of brake pressure, where now we're at let's just say 150,
Right.
So I think that's really when you get into that stuff and trying to get that staging down consistently, it's having some useful data available to you to really be able to fine tune that like anything.
So shameless commercial plug. If you're trying to figure this stuff out with your brakes, talk to your brake supplier. They should be able to walk you through all this stuff. Piston size. I'm just saying, generally speaking, mind you,
I feel like
master cylinder.
Guy.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying, if you're serious drag racing and you're trying to get this right, that's what your brake supply company is for. Whoever you choose to work with.
Do we drink for shameless plugs?
Oh God, I am
on it.
Nobody would be sober enough halfway through
I think
we'd be drunk too quick.
I think something to add to that whole bump box thing is to find out if your car can bump smooth enough, or if it can't, learn how to use your left foot as well as your right foot combined to be able to put a little brake pressure to hold it as it bumps, which will help with some of that. Some cars roll in nice and smooth without the brakes. Some cars, you got to put your foot on it quite a bit because you just can't get that particular trans brake to really bump smooth.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well,
and one of the tricks that works really well too is tying your line lock into your trans brake so that when you grab the trans brake, it's maintaining whatever brake pressure that you held. That works really well.
Yeah.
But in doing that, you have to have some switch, because typically when you back up these cars, you have to have the trans brake on. And if you don't think about it and you've just stopped and backing up, you're holding on a bunch of brake pressure. So what works really well is having like your boost controller switch activate a relay that now makes that line lock work off of the trans brake. And it's a great way to maintain brake pressure when you're trying to bump in.
I hope everybody's paying attention. That is some kick-ass advice right there for getting your program
Scott,
consistent.
Coming from a street car guy before Jamie put the FuelTech in my car, was I had a certain bump box, and in order to get it to that point where it would creep instead of bump, it's a fine line between creeping and the tranny being too hot the next pass and it not moving at all.
Oh, yeah. It's all about trans and internals temperatures as well. It moves around. Yeah.
Right, because then you had to increase actually the bump pressure in order to just get it creep again.
Scott Evans over here.
Consistency was just.
Evans, don't you have a thing where you make an adjustment to your Holley based, or how you were doing this based on the temp, where you were changing the duty cycle? Yeah, there are guys doing that.
I was looking at the trans brake temperature and changing it based on that. And a lot of guys on the Holley, they do it with a 2D table, and they, some guys are doing a single relay that it either bumps constantly or it's a single button push, right? And my version, I was always doing single button push as one bump because it was more consistent for me doing that than holding down a button and trying to release it at the right time. So for me, I was able to play with it and find out that when it was hotter, I needed to lengthen the time a little bit on my particular trans brake, and I could get a more consistent bump in.
Well, what I liked about Jamie, if you could tell me about the FuelTech, how it has that secondary go into that next speed,
Yes.
it doesn't bump.
So Anderson just came up with a new strategy for the bump box and or for the staging control that basically you can program a number of hits on the button. So for example, you have your settings, and after 4 bumps, after you hitting the staging control button 4 times, it adds a predetermined extra amount of percentage to the bump box. So now that the thing will move more aggressively if you've hit it 4 times, 5 times, whatever you specify. But you brought up a key point of that. Transmission temperature is very crucial on how the cars bump. And, again, this is going back to, the higher end drag racing stuff where we're cooling it and we're specifically getting it down to a temperature and we're maintaining that temperature between rounds. Whereas a street car or something like Scotty's car where we would hot lap it and the trans temperature was not consistent because it's just you don't have time to get it down that low. That's what makes it hard. And that feature that Anderson just came up with, I'm sure that other systems have it, but it makes it very nice because if you get into a situation where the car's not moving, you can simply hit it that extra 1 time and it adds a couple more percent to how long the trans brake's staying, deactivated to get the car to move.
I would have killed to have this information like a month ago.
Right. And I had to actually like play with it to figure that out on mine, because for me it was okay. I hit the button. Oh, it didn't move. What's the trans temperature? Oh, it's hotter. I need to add some more time and try again, And it was a lot of trips to the track playing with it. It wasn't like I got it all in one night.
Well, I discovered all this like doing this little local list race. So first pass, round 1 off the trailer, hit the button 1 time, it would bump and I'm in there all the way, stage ready to go. The next pass, I'm jamming the button and I can't tell if the car's even moving.
Right.
Panic mashing this thing 13 times before it finally goes in.
Right.
So to manage temperature for more street typical cars, like a true street guy or some of the stuff that you're talking about with like local list races, Mazir has, on the expensive side, but again, for this type of racing, a pan where you're able to circulate engine coolant, because again, street cars have coolant and cooling systems, to manage trans temperature, because it's something you can't do. So for a lot of us, we sit in lanes and we're recirculating everything. So I can, even in a 7-minute round trip on a true street deal, I can get oil temps and water temps back down into range. And with the Mazir pan, I can get the tran temp all down, and I have everything at about 140s, which is about as good as it'll do in 100 degrees ambient. But so there is a way to get the trans cooler into the loop to help manage some of that.
It helps if you have a really good trans cooler to begin with as well, because having something that can actually manage the heat to begin with is half the battle.
Absolutely.
And you guys have an alternator, so that's cheating.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Not fair. Yeah.
And a big battery.
A lot of drag week guys on this show, so that's kind of funny. Yeah, what they learn. That's why their cars weigh 4,000 pounds, though.
Yeah, but you guys have 16 volts.
Hey, huge. Speaking of which, drag
mine
week.
weighs 3,200 with me in it. I have no problems.
Speaking of drag week,
wasn't it Jeff Lutz
Go ahead.
Wasn't it Jeff Lutz that was in drag week that had a trailer behind him with like 16 batteries on it?
Yeah, something like that, right? There's been all kinds of generators and all kinds of stuff that guys have run on the back. It's pretty hilarious.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. No, God, while we're talking about drag week, just a quick change of subject, but I got to give a little shout out to Dennis and Alex Taylor, the Taylor family, getting their drag week cars ready. We got on the dyno today with Dennis's car, and it's making somewhere around 2,400 flywheel. And we buried a dyno, a chassis dyno today at like 1,500, but and it was funny because it buried it at like 4,100 RPM and then picked up like 20 more pounds of boost. But looking at fuel burn, he's around 2,400 horsepower, and they had the engine on a version of that engine on the engine dyno a couple years ago, and so they know kind of where it needs to be. And we're making that power on way less boost than they had to before. But anyway, it was cool to see them going and getting ready. They survived the whole getting the thing tuned and dialed in for the road, and now they're getting ready to load up and head out. Should be pretty cool next week.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is the week where amazing number of cars die. right
Before they
the
even
event.
get to the event. Yep.
Dude, I'm looking at the Facebook groups. It's heartbreaking, some of the stories in there.
There's some that haven't even gotten out yet that are really heartbreaking that happened yesterday and today that, oh, God, a couple of bitchin' cars on the dyno going viral, pictures of these sweet cars. And it's like, yeah. Sorry, that one didn't make it.
Which goes back to some of my questions about how you do first startup and how you make sure that you've gone through the tests. Scott, you were talking, Scott Evans, you were talking earlier today, when you got to make sure you've got cam sync and crank sync, spin it without spark plugs. We've done crazier stuff than that back in the day to make sure we had our crank sensor dyno.
Shout out to Bunton. Yeah.
You still have to have something to show your timing light, but the plug doesn't have to be in the hole. It just has to be just hanging ground to the engine.
Yeah, hanging and grounded on a header or something. Spin it over. Just have coil number 1 hooked up. Spin the motor over and make sure you got sync. That's my old trick.
Yeah, and the other thing, talking about that, the other thing I do is if you go, I've been telling guys this, and it works really well. If you're trying to verify that your cam sync is actually sending the right firing order by going to, the 5th cylinder in the sequence and you're getting back to the same timing that's on number 1, it works really well just to verify that, okay, I've got the right firing order and that my cam sync is sending. You know what I mean? It just makes it so that you don't get that nice pop when you go to actually fire the thing off because the cam sync's not right or whatnot.
Yeah.
I like to lay the first side. I like to lay off.
That was genius.
Wait, go ahead. So, he's talking about the paired cylinder, the 5th cylinder, the firing order is paired. It's in the same position as number 1.
Breezed over that. It makes sense to me, but I want to make sure everybody gets that because that's really smart to make sure it's not farting out the throttle body.
Correct. Yeah, it works really well, and and it's the same thing. You go on to number 1, and you go on typically in 6th cylinder or number 6 cylinder, and you have the same. It should be the same timing at that point, and that way you know that your cam sync is sending the correct firing order to each coil, so that okay, when I go to fire this thing, there's not a question. I know that this has got the correct firing order and it's sending the signal to the correct
well, this is what my dumbass does because I've had guys mess up the firing order in between. I'll actually put the firing order around every 90 degrees around the balancer in a white paint pen.
Oh, yeah.
So 1872, 6543, and I'll go around counterclockwise and then literally have them spin it and go on every one and make sure that it's showing up at around TDC. I don't care if it's plus or minus 10 off or 15 or whatever, but just I know it'll at least light and run without, we've done a couple of these EFI blower Pro Mod motors now, and holy shit, man, you better make sure you got that right before you try to let one of them things off. That gets expensive quick.
Yes, it does.
In a pinch at the track, when I didn't have a timing light handy because the guy didn't have one in his trailer, I've taken all the plugs out, laid them down so they're touching something, and visually spun it over and watched them, and then counted it off. Oh yeah, this is 1872 6543. So I got
you can do that with 2 people looking. Yep, I've done the same thing with 2 people. I can't do it by myself, but I've done it with 2 people.
I can do it one bank at a time and at least make sure the bank is in the correct order. I know my are firing correctly, my evens are firing correctly.
Or when you're not sure the guy's got the firing order right, you got a 4-7 swap and you got 2 cold holes. We'll sit there and literally have 2 guys hold 4 fingers over the plug holes and spin the motor over and start counting.
Yep.
Yeah, because you don't want to be that guy that sent the 4-7 swap cam with the standard firing order
on a 700 shot of nitrous. Cough, Mashmeyer.
And not spin the starter because you spin too fast, you won't feel it. But you can turn it over by hand and feel that compression come up.
Yeah. That's funny to hear these top guys use all these same tricks. That's pretty cool. We should let this guy go, man. It's like 10:30 and Jamie's got kids. He's at home. He needs to hang out with his family. Yeah. So we should wrap it up here. But anybody else got any questions on the show? Host guys here, whatever. You can hang out for a minute or two, Jamie. We bullshit for a minute after it's done too. It's worth hanging out.
No question, but just thank you. It's been awesome.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah,
thanks
it's been a great time.
Yeah. We have the right crowd for you. You're welcome to come back anytime for sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. I'll put you guys on mute. I'll say goodbye to the rest of the crowd. Thanks everybody else for tuning in tonight. Very cool shit. Good to have Jamie Miller on here, Scott MacDonald. We didn't get Justin Keith on. I think he's busy getting ready for Streetcar Takeover in Tulsa is coming up here really soon. So anyway, that's all we got. Check out RealTuners.com. We got class schedules. We're starting to add more class dates for the fall and winter. We'll talk to all you guys in a week. Take care.